Welcome to this special off-season edition of what used to be NFL Live. Now in the off-season, we're just talking some best ball strategy here today. I am joined by the guy. Is it 4 milli makers now, Two Gun?
Yeah, I will have $4 million wins. So 3 of them were like your traditional first place in the milli maker, and the fourth one was like a $1.25 million win in the DraftKings Championship for like second place or whatever. So we're just going with $4 million wins.
That's perfect. And basically what it means is when this guy talks football, we want to listen. We want to hear all of his thoughts, both strategy-wise and also some individual plays that we're targeting, stacks that he's targeting. So we're going to get into all of this on this show. Where we're going to start here is the difference between playing best ball and Underdog and playing best ball and DraftKings. What are the pros and cons of each? What are the different contests like on each? I'll start with you, Two Gun. Where is your preferred play and why is that?
That's a tough one. On the one hand, I can never stray from my beloved DraftKings because that's where I've won everything at. On the other hand, I feel like Underdog is a little bit ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. I do like how DraftKings has 2 more positions. Like I like the little deeper roster. I think it's a little bit more fun. Mm-hmm. Part of me really wants to wait for judgment until like the season's over, and I want to see how they cancel drafts and when people try to throw drafts. And it's different from DFS because you have to have a little bit of element of trust that they can actually prevent any sort of cheating. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to withhold judgment on who's better on that until I see the season's over. I've played best ball before, but I'm really focusing on it more this year. So, and I can tell DraftKings is focusing on it more this year. But it's a small differences. I do like how Underdog, even though it has 2 less spaces, with their slow drafts, they give you an extra 3 hours, so like you're less likely to sleep through it. Mm-hmm. And
that's always nice.
And a small thing is when you're doing a fast draft and you have a lot of slow drafts, like the fast draft goes up to the top, so it's easier to like go there because if you like zoom out of your DraftKings, you have a fast draft, you have 20 slow drafts. It's like, how do I find my slow draft again? So there's like small things like that. But I really want to withhold judgment. Although I will say I do like this milli maker with a $500 buy-in on DraftKings, provided like I really feel confident that it was run correctly at the end of the year because I'm going to be investing a significant amount of money in it, and I feel like if they kind of blow it, it's going to hurt me a little bit. But I just love DraftKings so much that I'm not going to I'll never say anything too bad about them.
So. Right. I think the thing that you really kind of got to there that I like is I think the contest offerings are a little bit more unique on DraftKings and a little bit more kind of well-serving to everybody. If you are somebody who likes the like small dollar 150 entry lottery ticket type contests, you can find that at DraftKings. If you like the smaller single entry contests like myself, you can find that on DraftKings, even in best ball, which is a big difference from last year. I think they have really done a nice job of expanding their contest offerings. So I may end up doing more best ball drafts on DraftKings for that reason, but I'm definitely going to have action on both. It sounds like you are pretty much sticking to the MME type of approach here on best ball, or are you also going to try to dip your toes into the single entry, 3 entry type max contest over there on DraftKings?
I'll probably do it. I just haven't really thought about it too much. I just don't want to waste my single entry like in May or June. Like if I'm doing a single entry, at least let's wait till August. That's just kind of how I think. If it's one of those situations where I think the single entry or the 3 entry is going to fill up, like on Underdog, they've had a lot of these like 15 max entries that look like they're going to fill up by the end of June. Sure, I'll definitely do that then. But if it looks like it's not going to fill till September, I can wait. There still is 3.5 months. As much as best ball makes me feel like football is just around the corner, still a lot of time till football. Like normally, I don't even know who's playing on what team at this time of the year. And I don't really care until end of August, early September, even when I used to play small best ball. But now that I'm actually doing a lot of best ball this year, I know a lot more about football now.
Yeah, I'm usually the same way. And to that point, it helps that we have such a great NFL team here at FTN where I don't feel like I have to go do a ton of research. I can just go look at the best ball rankings. I can just go look at some of these, breakdowns and articles from Sam, from Jeff, all these guys. So everything is kind of in place for us where we don't have to do that much work to enjoy best ball at this time of year.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're all kind of like supporting each other and supporting our
Mhm.
subscribers, and it's just it's kind of a nice little echo chamber.
Yeah, that's for sure. There's one other element of this Underdog versus DraftKings comparison, and I think a lot of the people who are watching this are probably watching because they enjoyed the streams that you and I did together for DFS this past year. And I think there's a really nice parallel here where I kind of feel like the average skill level is probably a little bit higher on Underdog for best ball than it is on DraftKings, where on DraftKings maybe people are winning tickets. They didn't know what kind of qualifier they were entering into, but they suddenly have a ticket for a best ball draft. So in they go. That sort of thing where it's similar to DFS playing low stakes versus high stakes, where, of course, like on the one hand, you want to be facing lesser competition, but there is a trade off where going up into high stakes or going to Underdog also makes your competition a little bit more predictable. So if you have a way that you feel confident in leveraging the field with, I think it then makes even more sense to go over to Underdog. I'll give you an example of this. Like I think the Underdog population is probably a little bit less likely to snipe you on a quarterback or a secondary receiver that's going to complete a stack that you already have. So like let's say early on in a draft you took both CD Lamb and Tony Pollard. Dak Prescott is coming around. Maybe his ADPs, I think it's around like 91, something like that. Maybe you know that your next draft pick is going to be 95th pick of the draft. You can be a little bit more confident in Underdog that somebody who doesn't have either of Lamb or Pollard already is less likely to suddenly take Dak Prescott right before you want to take him to complete that stack. So I do think even though the competition might be stronger on Underdog, the fact that it makes it a little bit more predictable maybe actually makes it beneficial in some ways too.
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things on that. The first is like I still don't really know how much I like the best ball GME. Because it's different from DFS, where like the other people's decisions don't affect your roster in DFS, right? So if someone starts taking like really stupid picks, and all of a sudden you're just able to get better players, like that directly helps you. And if you're not in those types of drafts, it kind of hurts you. So, but on the other hand, I will say this about DFS, like, I play high stakes, I play a lot. I don't really beat up on like the really little guys. Like I'm not in the $5 single entry events. Like I don't give a shit. I'm not in the quarter arcade. I'm not even allowed in the quarter arcade. Like I play against high stakes players who generally are pretty decent players.
Mm-hmm.
They're not stupid. They definitely know football. They know how to stack. They're the people I play against are pretty smart. But I like to believe that I can consistently beat up on them because they kind of fall into the same types of lines of thinking. And I see that on Underdog, where right now, like the big thing is zero RB, like, wide receivers are less fragile, quarterbacks less fragile. So like I see guys like Chris Olave going 20th, even though it's half point PPR.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a mistake. And you don't see that as much on DraftKings where people are just like, who's that? Chris Olave, what? Didn't he play last year? What? Like Odell Beckham, who's more of a name, gets drafted earlier on DraftKings than Underdog. Maybe people on Underdog think, oh, he's washed, blah, blah. Like, I'm not falling for that. It's all about Zay Flowers. So I can see people on Underdog being kind of sharp, but there's actually it almost like they don't think they're as sharp. They're not as sharp as they think they are. But then again, on DraftKings, like in terms of just the random, like total dumbasses, total like what was it like? Why are they picking Tom Brady in the first round? Like, I don't know what to say about that.
Yeah, it seems like there's some groupthink involved maybe over there at Underdog. And to your point, like in the high stakes for DFS, one of the reasons you're so successful is because you consistently take big risks. So it helps your process if the really popular plays are 60% instead of 40%. And it helps if the super contrarian plays are 3% instead of 10%. All of those things then kind of lend your style of play more to the high stakes contests where you're going to get so much more concentrated ownership. So yeah, I think extending that to best ball then, once again, if you have these like strong convictions on what the field is doing wrong, it helps if the field is doing it wrong to a more extreme extent, which you're probably going to get more on Underdog than DraftKings. So I really like that discussion. I think it's worth continuing to have throughout the offseason. Maybe we'll see trends develop on one side and not the other, and we can continue to take advantage of things in that way. The next question I want to ask you about is whether you are playing MME or SE, single entry, obviously has pretty large ramifications in DFS. Do you think that we can extend that to best ball too and say that you should be approaching drafts for single entry best ball contest dramatically differently than you would for the large like lottery ticket type contests?
I don't think so, unless the field size is so much different. Mm-hmm. I'm not like really confident enough in best ball to say like how you should approach the Millie Maker type events versus a 2,000 person event, but definitely a 100 person event is very different than a 2,000 or above event.
I think the main place that I would start to maybe differentiate is knowing that you kind of have to hit the absolute nuts in those larger field MME type lottery ticket contests where, like, let's go back to the stacking example. Let's say that you have taken those early Cowboys. You know that you're targeting Michael Gallup later. You know that you're targeting Jake Ferguson later as one of your tight ends. So you really want Dak Prescott on your team, but there's a running back or a receiver that you really, really want to take at that spot where you know that you can take Dak there, and if you don't take him there, there's a risk that he won't come back around the next time you're picking. And in those larger field contests, I kind of think you have to take the approach that, you know what, if I'm going to have the type of lineup that has a real chance, the type of team that has a real chance to take down this tournament, I need to be able to take risks getting my guy and just hoping that he comes back around, because if he doesn't, then so be it. I'm not going to win this contest. But if I just reach for every player that I feel like I need to have on this roster, I'm also not going to have a chance to win this large one.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to need to have some more stacks in the larger one than a smaller one. But at the same time, it's like you just kind of want some more differentiation too. Like if your league is just more the same over and over again with ADP, it's going to give you less confidence that like once the playoffs hit that you're really going to have a different enough team to make it through. So yeah, I think you just in general, like the bigger ones, you just kind of have an F it attitude. If it didn't go the way I go, I'll just enter it again. Enter it later.
I saw in your article that you brought up a really interesting point that if you are somebody who is drafting teams already, like you and I are maybe ahead of the curve for a lot of people because we're already in a lot of best ball drafts, that we maybe want to take shots on guys, not necessarily just because we think that they're really good draft picks, but because we think that their average draft position is going to rise throughout the summer. So we're maybe getting someone at 80 that we expect to be closer to 60 by the end of the summer, by the start of the year. And so we're just kind of getting that like closing line value, if you will, on some of these draft picks. How much are you kind of emphasizing that thought in a lot of your drafts?
I think I should emphasize it more. I haven't really done it as much because with my article came out like a day after DeAndre Hopkins was dropped by the Cardinals, and I was going to actually talk about him in the article because I was like, look, I don't see him being a Cardinal because they clearly are tanking the season. He might not even play this season. So why are we going to pay this guy $30 million? The market didn't react the way I thought it would. I thought he might actually get drafted later. I wasn't really sure what he would, or might get drafted the same. And once he gets picked up by a team, then he gets moved up. But he's been already getting drafted 5-10 spots earlier than he was before. Because there really is no worse place to be than the Cardinals if you're DeAndre Hopkins. So I think that was a good example. I was actually able to get him before he was dropped. I got a good amount of him in the 40s, 45. I wish I had drafted him more. I wish I had really told myself, look, he's definitely getting cut, and he's definitely finding a better spot. And no matter what, he's probably going to be drafted 10 spots higher. So I feel like I should be doing this more than I am. Another example, I think, was like Derek Carr. I really liked him, and he kind of immediately got bumped up from like 175 to 145. And right now, I have a lot of Michael Thomas, and I kind of think if he gets like that, like, oh, Michael Thomas is really fine. Like you start hearing these news stories, like, oh yeah, he's playing 100% snaps, he's full go. Like, is he really going to get drafted like 93, and Olave is going to get drafted 20? Like, is there really going to be a 70 spot difference if people start to think that Michael Thomas, he's okay, he's kind of back? Like, it's hard to tell with these wide receivers. Like, look what happened to Jarvis Landry. Like, he was the man. He got like 10 receptions a game, and then he sucked, and now he's basically out of the league. So I have a feeling his ADP is going to move. He's like some of these guys, ADP is going to move. Odell Beckham might be the same thing. Like if it kind of comes out, oh, he's going to get eased in, and it's like, fuck that. But like they paid him $15 million. Like, okay, in fairness, Marquez Valdez-Scantling only got paid $10 million a year. So you never know. You can't just go by on that. But if you start getting that, Zay Flowers is going to get eased in, and OBJ is like they're going to try to get him fed. Like, is he really going to get drafted 110th? And Mark Andrews going to get drafted 30th?
Yeah,
I think really with some of these veterans that are like out of the league and came back, you might see some big moves closer to kickoff if there's like they're okay type of situation. And then obviously if like some of these guys that aren't drafted like Fournette or Zeke. Like, if they actually get drafted or not drafted, but if they sign with a team, they're obviously going to get, bumped. And if they don't, well, they're probably going to – they're already pretty low except for Zeke. But, so.
I love the Michael Thomas example because I think it's almost the perfect example of what we should be looking for in terms of a candidate who could have like a surge in average draft position throughout the year. It almost gets down to like, imagine if this player is receiving a lot of buzz throughout training camp and throughout, the early preseason, for whom are people going to buy into that buzz? And for whom are people going to say, everyone gets buzz at this time of year, right? And so the guy who has previously been one of the best producing fantasy receivers in the game, if all of a sudden the buzz around him is, wow, he looks as sharp as he did 4 years ago. He looks, significantly faster than he did last year, significantly stronger than he did last year. People are going to buy into that. So that's the kind of thing that could lead to a gigantic surge in ADP. I absolutely love that call. I've been drafting as much of him as possible ever since I read your article. And so shout out to you for that. Hopefully,
just so we don't jinx it, he might also get injured over the summer. And I might have all these Michael Thomas that are just like, yeah, he's not coming back till 2024. And it's like, oh, great. I just wasted.
No question. But hey, we're drafting him right now. That's not going to kill those teams, right? Like we're probably taking him as the fifth, sixth, seventh, something like that receiver on our team right now. So yeah, it's certainly I think a really, really good risk reward draft pick right now. I think another candidate, by the way, going to the running back position is probably someone like Joe Mixon, who, there's a little bit of uncertainty. Is he even going to be the guy at the start of the year? But if suddenly you're in the second, third week of preseason, yeah, it's clearly Joe Mixon at the top of that depth chart. Well, he's not going to be taken where he is. He's going to be taken much closer to where he was last year. So if you're taking him now and that ends up being how this plays out, then you've got a fantastic value there, I think. So I think the key here is, we're talking about some players, but maybe even more important than who we're speaking of, it's what's the process behind these guys. And I think Michael Thomas, DeAndre Hopkins, Joe Mixon kind of perfectly encapsulate what we should be looking for in terms of guys who could see that surge in ADP.
I've also noticed that Mixon is drafted a lot sooner on like DraftKings. It's like 45 versus 55. And again, it's one of those things where like the underdog guys a little too smart for their own good. Like I keep thinking, like I feel like I should have more Mixon. I do draft him a good amount. Also with Dalvin Cook, like, is he not going to be the lead back somewhere? Like, why is he getting drafted 73rd? And if he's getting drafted 73rd, why is Madison drafted 87th? Like, is everyone just convinced it's going to be a timeshare in Minnesota? Like, yeah, I don't know. In general, I really like running backs. I'm probably pretty running back heavy, so I should be more exposed to these guys, more so Cook than Madison. But I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much taking a very similar approach to start the year. My initial read of the boards were the main thing that stood out to me was I couldn't believe how high quarterbacks were going this year. Did you have kind of that same takeaway?
Yeah, so I wrote my article about how running backs are a lot smaller in the first 2 rounds than they were, and part of it's wide receivers and part of it's quarterbacks. And there is something to be said for. I do draft quarterbacks sometimes. I do draft Mahomes, Hurts, and Josh Allen. I generally don't reach for them. It just kind of happens when I draft them. The nice thing about drafting them is that you don't have to draft another quarterback till the end. Like you can just get more. You can get more random players. So I get it. Those guys just have really high floors. So there's just less of a need to go with a 3 quarterback type approach. And if they get injured, you're screwed. So whatever. So I get it. I'm not like fighting that trend, but I'm definitely not overexposed to it. I'm like probably slightly fading it. Like I'm slightly fading the high-end quarterback, mainly because I just think there's a lot of these like quarterbacks like Matt Stafford and Desmond Ridder and just like a lot of these really late quarterbacks that are like, I think they actually could be pretty decent. So 3 quarterbacks there versus, a stud quarterback and one other quarterback. I kind of like the 3 quarterbacks with some of the quarterbacks I like more, but I'm not hating on the Mahomes, Kelsey, or the Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs approach either. I definitely do have it sometimes.
You kind of just answered this question instinctively there, but how does your roster construction overall change based on how your early rounds go? Like if you're taking a bunch of running backs early, do you often end up with fewer running backs on that team than if you draft a quarterback early and a receiver early?
Yeah, whenever I'm drafting early, I generally have less of. So if I draft a stud quarterback, I generally just have 2 quarterbacks. If I'm drafting a lot of great running backs, I'm going to have less running backs because then I think one of them should be fine, or 2 of them should be fine by the end. Like if generally the position I'm taking earlier is the position I'm not taking later.
I think this was a pretty common mistake that some people made last year, where if, let's say you took Christian McCaffrey first overall, I think a lot of people would have said, okay, I took him for the upside, but I need to protect myself in case McCaffrey gets hurt. He's an injury-prone guy. I've got to protect myself, so I want more running backs towards the end. And I think this is a major mistake because we are gunning for such low probability outcomes for these takedowns, for these giant best ball contests, that in order for you to have a real chance at that, everything kind of has to go your way. You need a lot of luck on the health department for any one lineup. So if you're taking an injury prone guy early on, you kind of need to pick the rest of your lineup under the assumption that your injury prone guy doesn't get injured this year. It works out that way. And so, if you end up then kind of hedging that McCaffrey pick early on, you're hedging him instead of supporting your weaker wide receiver class because you ended up with a running back in the first round instead of a receiver. Or maybe it's you have a weaker tight end class or weaker quarterback class. Whatever the case is, you're sacrificing where you shouldn't be sacrificing, because the only chance that your lineup has of ending up with a takedown is if you have that really nice entry luck on a high risk play like McCaffrey. So I think that's something maybe a little bit counterintuitive to some people, but a really, really key point. And if you take that approach of like thinking, for me to hit, everything has to kind of go according to plan and not hedge within your lineups, I think you're going to have a lot more best ball success.
Right, because best ball is drafted like a traditional fantasy lineup, more or less, which brings out like, it's like traditional fantasy players. Like one of those things, like like you can't take the traditional fantasy player out of the fantasy guy. Like you can't think of it as just playing against 12 people, unless you are just playing against 12 people. They do have those sit and goes, which is fine if you do that on that, like, and you're just focusing on pure hedges and stuff. But when you're drafting in these massive GPPs where it gets all the playoffs get all everyone gets merged, then you just have to think about upside, because you're not drafting to make the playoffs in min cash. You're drafting to hit the nuts 3 weeks in a row, I might add. It's not just 1 week. You have to hit it 3 times. So you got to think about all that.
That brings up another interesting question. When you are doing these drafts, how much are you thinking about just getting through your initial 12 and into the playoffs versus thinking something like, if I get through the playoffs, I want to maximize my chances of then getting to the championship and having a really strong championship week team?
I mean, I'm thinking of it more as the latter because I'm really gunning for upside, but I'm not going to the extreme where some people are like, well, I'm looking to take these guys and bring back for week 17 because that's where all the money is. And, honestly, maybe that's the right thing to do. Maybe I should do that more. I'm not really there yet. I'm still mainly focused on just having overall upside and stacks. Because even when we play DFS, like, it's not always you have a stack and a bring back that's the best. Sometimes you just have like a skinny stack or it's not even like the best DFS lineup is always, a quarterback, 2 wide receivers, and then 2 bringbacks. Like, don't get me wrong. I've done that a lot of the time, and I've had I think 2 of my $1 million wins are like that. But sometimes you do a skinny stack and it's just fine. Like, that was my second milli win was what's called the Green Bay quarterback that's not in the league anymore, and Devontae Adams, and then no one else in the game. So sometimes you need that really skinny stack and just manage to hit on everything else to actually win a massive GPP.
Mm-hmm.
So
was that Matt Flynn week?
No, it was oh god, I can't believe I forgot his name.
It doesn't really matter.
I have to edit it. Like, this is just bothering me. Okay.
I think another point there. I'm actually kind of against this.
That's the guy. All right.
Who is it?
Brett Hundley.
That's right. Okay, that's right. Getting back to this conversation about kind of like the game stack idea for week 17, I'm actually against this idea. And I think it goes back to what you were talking about earlier, where people on Underdog, there's maybe a little bit of groupthink going on at times. When you get to that week 17, let's say you're in the championship. What is it that you hope to see when you look at your team and compare your team to everyone else's team? What you want is unique combinations of players, right? Like, so many people are going to have the same guys because someone just went off the week prior, and that's why you're in the championship. And so let's say you have, I don't know, a Philadelphia stack, and they had a huge week 16. So the Philadelphia stack is enormously owned in week 17. What you don't want to see is that your secondary stack is the same secondary stack that everybody else has. You want these really unique combinations. And if they're even just a small portion of people who are trying to game stack that week 17 matchup, then whoever Philadelphia is playing, there's a good chance that that's the most common secondary stack among finalists. So in order to have those unique combinations in that championship that give you the best chance of finishing at the top, I actually think you maybe want to avoid those situations. I think for a lot of us, this is maybe a concept that we need to explore a little bit more. We need to see some more data or think about conceptually more and have these conversations. But I think for now, that's where I land on this.
Yeah, and it's again one of those things where everyone looks at past data and past things, and then they like, oh, this works back when people weren't even playing best ball that much, so therefore I'll do it now and I'll do my bring back, and then everyone does it. It's kind of the same thing with zero RB. Like, oh yeah, like last year, I remember you had Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, like best ball drafts are pretty much the same as traditional drafts. And now they're not at all. Like, you have maybe 2 running back. You have, besides McCaffrey, like you might even have a running back in the first round. Maybe Bijan Robinson, that's it. Whereas it used to be half. Like, they've adjusted because like, oh, this is optimal looking at 2 years ago, but then they overthink it and they take it too far. So if no one else does the bring back, sure, do the bring back. But it looks like everyone wants to do the bring back. And luckily your boy here, me, is too lazy to figure all that out. And it's like, you know what, screw it. I'll let all those other people do the bring back and I'll just do my own thing and it'll probably just end up working out. Because that's just kind of how it works sometimes. Like, everyone, like, I've noticed that with DFS is because that's why I like playing the higher stakes with the smart people, because they're smart and they all like do the smart thing and they all do the group thing. And then it ends up screwing them over. And me, who's kind of lazy, just like, screw it. Let's just do Mike Evans in week 17. And look where it got us. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get more of those weeks this year. That was a really fun time. But I think a really good point there you made is looking at past data can be really problematic here because the sample sizes are so small and they're so incredibly affected by just like one or two players. So if in 1 year, let's say two of the top four running backs off the board end up with down years, whether they're hurt or they just don't produce, and you have these two like really late round draft pick running backs that end up in, let's say, the top 5 or top 10 producing running backs for the season, then for that year, zero running back is going to look like a phenomenal strategy. And so maybe everyone's going to do it the next year. What if the next year, like all 4 of the top 4 running backs all hit? They all end up in the top 5 of producers, and there are no late round guys and even the top 15 or top 20 producers at the position. So it can just be so incredibly different year to year based on just like 3 or 4 players, that relying at all on that past data for best ball, I think, can be really, really troubling.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at last year's winner, like that guy basically had 0 wide receiver. Like he had Tyquan Thornton going off. That's why he won. So I think people, they just have this mentality of, oh, like I'm going to get that, like, you know, your guys might get injured. I might have that like running back that goes off for 20. And then like it's all about having these high-end wide receivers. But I think the important thing is that it used to be people took a lot of running backs. So you could get more good wide receivers early. Now you're doing Amari Cooper, or like he's getting drafted ahead of a lot of like Aaron Jones, for example, or he's getting drafted ahead of the Aaron Jones, Joe Mixon, Miles Sanders. Like Calvin Ridley is getting drafted like way before all these guys. Like really? Like why do we just assume that these wide receivers are both going to be healthy and producing more than these running backs that ostensibly should be getting a 70%, share or more? So, and the thing about running back is that, yes, like you can take in a secondary running back and feed him the ball and he'll get points. But if he's not fed the ball, if he's on the bench, he's going to do nothing. So it's all about who's starting. Whereas with wide receiver, you can get a 20-point game out of a Mac Hollins just because why not? Like, as long as the wide receiver is getting the snaps, yes, he might get a 5-point game. He might get a 25-point game. You never really know. That's the nice thing about best ball is you don't have to guess. It'll just use it when he does. So that's why I've tended to have kind of more steadily running backs and taking more just random wide receivers in the later rounds.
I love that. Let's pivot away from strategy a little bit and talk more specifically about who we're targeting. So do you have any stacks that you are either going into drafts with the intent of trying to stack them, or even just teams that for whatever reason you end up with a lot of stacks of?
So I'm doing enough drafts that I kind of like adjust based on what's happening in the draft. But there's obviously more players, like certain players and stacks that I draft more often because I want to. Let me like go ahead and just look at some of them, so I'm not just talking out of my ass.
As you do that, it sounds like, because this is going to be a follow-up question of mine anyway. It sounds maybe a little bit more like you don't necessarily go into drafts with the intent of stacking a specific team, but you very much just kind of let who you pick early on kind of dictate, okay, I've already taken CeeDee Lamb, I've already taken Tony Pollard. I may as well try to complete the stack later with Dak Prescott, Jake Ferguson, Michael Gallup, etc.
Yes, exactly. And just kind of like looking at my percentages, I don't really have like a running back that I'm taking much more than 20% right now. I'm just taking more of the higher end running backs. Like I have a lot more Ramondre Stevenson, Austin Eckler, James Conner, Nick Chubb, Cam Akers. These are all the guns I am having, 17, 20% of. Like once you drop all the way down to the Samaje Perines, that's where I have like the 2% of. So like I just have more running backs that are the first stringers. Once you get to wide receiver and stacks, that's where like I have some more of. I actually have a lot of Odell Beckham on Underdog because we talked about the what's it called, the ADP differences there. But otherwise, the stacks that I really have, like a lot of quarterback, wide receiver, is so far Derek Carr and Michael Thomas. We talked about that. I like Matt Stafford a lot for some reason. I'd say those were like the two that really are sticking out to me, like looking at like what I've actually done. and Desmond Ritter and Mac Hollins, which is kind of a weird stack, but I also like stacking him, with Kyle Pitts or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense, by the way, that a lot of your higher owned guys are later draft picks because it's so much easier to kind of get your guy late. Where,
right,
if you love Mahomes, for example, whether or not you are able to draft him is so dependent on what your draft position is. It's not really the case with these later guys. So I'm the same way. Some of my highest running back so far is Deuce Vaughn. I have and that's despite my love for Tony Pollard. Like I'm actually pretty high on the Dallas offense, which I really, really hate as an Eagles fan. But the thought like they could have a lot of like really high scoring games, maybe even blow some teams out where Pollard has a big game. There are a lot of passing touchdowns, and then Deuce Vaughn comes in just in garbage time and ends up with 50 yards and a touchdown. He can do that, something like that. My highest owned receivers, Michael Gallup, so same theme there, and Corey Davis of all guys. I don't even know. Like I don't feel like I have a ton of conviction there. I more or less just want to bet on the Jets to some degree, and I'm not really finding that I'm picking many other Jets. So I get to Corey Davis. It's like, all right, may as well get my Jets exposure this way.
Yeah, I feel like no one really knows what's going on with the Jets wide receivers in terms of like, besides Garrett Wilson being the alpha, like who's getting what, and I honestly don't know either. That's where I wish I was smarter, but I kind of more conviction on other teams, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. It's just I'm guessing more. So like that's just like an example again being Mac Hollins. Like I don't really see who's like obviously I forgot his name escapes me. The Drake London is obviously the main wide receiver there, and obviously Bijan Robinson is going to take a lot of the Kyle Pitts, but in terms of just actual wide receiver, like who's going to be out on the field, like Mac Hollins might be out on the field of 100% of the snaps. Like there's really no one after him on the Falcons. So can he have a 20-point game here and there? Like not every week, just every now and then. For the last pick, sure. So that's what I like about him. Just some other random guys like Robert Woods. Like I think the Texans offense is going to be better this year because it can't get any worse than it was. I don't know if it's going to be a lot better, but it can't really get any worse. And they don't have Brandon Cooks. So they have these like kind of like random wide receivers that don't have much experience. I don't know, but like Robert Woods probably going to be playing most of the snaps most of the year. And if I get him in the 18th round or more, he might be good for a few games as, a 15-point guy. So I'm looking for in the late rounds guys that I feel confident will be out on the field a lot. And that's all I really ask of them.
I think one other big takeaway for me when it comes to stacking is that I want to target teams that I think have a really wide range of outcomes, because for any individual player, they too are likely then going to have a wide range of outcomes, but the downside is going to be baked into the ADP, even for someone who has a really high upside. And so if you can extend this argument throughout an entire stack, then being right about one, having one of them kind of hit that ceiling range of outcomes makes it far more likely that the rest are going to as well. So some teams that fit this, Bill, for me, you alluded to him earlier, Derek Carr and the Saints, I think really fit this well. We don't know so much, like we don't know what type of efficiency they'll have. We don't know how aggressive they'll be when it comes to passing the ball, that sort of thing. I think the Falcons kind of fit the same mold. Certainly not comparing them to the Eagles of last year, but I think an important point here is like the Eagles were one of the best stacks last year because people were very unsure of what the Eagles pass rate would be like. And I think we can make that exact argument with this Falcon stack. It wouldn't surprise anyone if they try to run the ball as often or even more often than they did last year. But what if they say, you know what? We want to see what Ritter can do. We want to see what Bijan can do out in space. We want him running routes more than we just want to hand him the ball. And maybe their pass rate is 5 to 10 percentage points higher than what the industry is expecting. That makes Kyle Pitts much more interesting. That makes Drake London much more interesting. I think we can extend those arguments. Yeah, there you go. He perfect. I think the key though is when you're thinking about, okay, why am I stacking? It's so that all of those guys can end up dramatically outproducing their ADP. And the best way to do that is if their ADP is where it is in large part because people have strong doubts. And if those doubts don't come to fruition, then they're all going to pay off.
Yeah, I think people having a strong lean about how an offense is going to be in May or June is, you know what I'm saying? Like you really think you know exactly what Atlanta's going to do with a rookie running back and a quarterback that's had a few games? Like, okay, like,
yeah,
let's not like everyone on Twitter has to act like they know everything about everything. Like that's just kind of how Twitter works. But that's not how the real world works. Like I'm not acting like I know that Mac Hollins is going to have a 20-point game at all. I just think he's going to be out on the field a lot, and therefore he might have a few good games. So for a last pick, I kind of like him. But yes, in general, I think you have to question at the ADP, what is this saying? Like going way back to the DeAndre Hopkins thing, clearly at a 40-something ADP, people were like, okay, there's a good chance he's going to stay on the Cardinals, and he's going to be getting the ball thrown from Colt McCoy or whatever. And clearly, once he's off that, clearly people think, okay, he's going to be on a real team, and like that was clearly in his ADP. So there's other guys like Alvin Kamara. Like, what is his ADP? Like, what game suspension does that mean? Like, if it's 6 games and he's going to be playing for most of the season in the playoffs, is he going to be around, in the 50s? Or, I mean, he may give, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to guess on that.
Yeah.
But I think in general, it's like to expect, like, to think you really know how an offense is going to be, and then just be like, oh, I need a team that's going to throw the ball, or, oh, he's not going to get the touches. Like, that's just not, you're thinking way too highly of your ability to know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Aside from Mac Hollins, are there any guys that you would really consider yourself like incredibly overweight on, or that you consistently make a target of yours really late in drafts?
Yeah. So it's, like you said, it's a lot of these guys in the late rounds. Besides, like like some of these guys are more mid rounds. I have a lot of like Van Jefferson because I like the Rams, because I just think the Rams will be a better offense than they were last year, and he'll be the number 2 guy. So once we're talking like late rounds, I'm starting to draft like some Cardinals now lately, like Keontae Ingram as a running back, because I think he's the second. Like again, I think he's the second running back after James Conner. Like, who really knows what's happening there? And they might really just be like, screw it. Like, let's trade James Conner. Let's just run with Keontae Ingram and see what he can do. Also, their new guy, Michael Wilson. At first, I like Greg Dortch, but it seems like Michael Wilson might be the guy that's actually going to be running, on the other side of Marquise Brown. And shout out to Magic Sports Guy for pointing this out to me. But you start going down random Cardinals. So it's stuff like that, like guys that either I think will actually be the second running back and might get touches, and I can see a path to them being the main running back. But it's mainly these wide receivers that just I think are going to get more play and a lot of snaps. And again, I like if I can get them, Robert Woods, just stuff like guys like that.
I'll throw a name out to you, and you can pretty much get this guy in the last round of every draft, or at maybe second last round of some. Nyheim Hines, with the thought being, I think there's a chance that he's able to earn most of the passing down work, and certainly I think like last year, he was certainly disappointing once he got to Buffalo that he wasn't getting that kind of work, but obviously they got him for what he brings to the special teams. But I think, too, they just thought, it's late in the season by the time they got him. We don't need to completely introduce him to a new offense and give him such a responsibility. We just want him to be a dynamic punt returner, kick returner, whatever. With a full offseason, I think maybe he automatically just becomes a little bit more involved. And with any opportunity whatsoever, I think he's capable of earning more and more. The guy is super talented. We saw how dynamic he can be in the passing game on a pretty bad offense in Indianapolis. So if all of a sudden he's getting these snaps and running valuable routes in the Buffalo offense, I think he could be a difference maker. That's kind of my approach late. Is I don't really need the guy who's, more likely to give me 5 points a week than Nyheim Hines is. I care about the guy who's more likely to give me 15 to 20 2 or 3 times throughout the year. And maybe Hines ends up with a role large enough that he can kind of play the JD McKissick role, if you will. And all of a sudden, I'm getting like 80 picks worth of value there based on the other guys in that role where they're going.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. You're not just like guessing. Yeah, I mean, you're not just like guessing, oh, maybe this other guy's get injured, so he gets a run. So, yeah, I like it. Maybe I'll start doing that myself. Because I just thought, oh, Damian Harris, oh, James Cook, whatever. But, yeah, I mean, I don't think they just traded for him just for punt returns, so.
And the thing with both Harris and Cook is they're probably seeing, certainly the case with Harris, better runners than they are pass catchers, pass blockers. So I think as unlikely it is that, Hines certainly isn't going to end up with 10 carries a game at any point in the season. But
you might have like one game with like 7 catches.
Yeah. And even if he's just like has this really nice third down role or like a third down and red zone type role because they want to throw the ball in the red zone instead of run it, that's super valuable. So I think he has a chance of ending up in a really valuable role in this offense. And obviously it's a great offense. Perfect.
Yeah, he'll have a role that's very, like he'll have the same role, but it's just the amount of the fantasy outcome is going to be very variable. Like some weeks it's going to be 2 points or 1 point, and there's going to be that one game where they're coming from behind and they're passing a lot and just doing a lot of dump offs, and he gets that late touchdown on a screen pass or some shit like that. So you'll have that 1 20-point game or 2 of those 20-point games, and for a last round pick, that's great.
Yeah. Are there any final thoughts that we haven't really gotten to yet on this show that you find yourself thinking about a lot in your drafts that you want to touch on before we get out of here?
I can't really think of anything yet. No, I'm still trying to get feelers and trying I try to keep an open mind and just kind of like continually draft so I as my kind of process changes or like what I care about changes, I'm able to shift stuff around by drafting consistently instead of doing it all in 1 week where I'm like, oh, I changed my mind. I don't like this guy as much. I actually want this guy, and then it's too late. So I kind of like just doing it steady throughout the summer.
I've got one final question for you. You and I are both doing a lot of drafts now. We'll be doing a lot of drafts pretty much at every point during the summer. If we have a listener who is planning on only doing, let's say, 10 drafts this entire offseason, how many would you suggest they do now? How many would you suggest they do a month from now? And how many would you suggest they do in the last few weeks before the season starts?
I'd probably say 2 June, 2 July, and then 2, call it, early mid-August, and then 4 late August, early September, something like that. Just, the same thing, kind of break it up. You're going to want to have a little bit more of a bias, at least the month before. But do one every now and then here and there. Mm-hmm. So
I like that. And I think this is another one of those topics that you can do all the past analysis you want on at what time of year have the past winners drafted and when did they draft that winning lineup. It can completely change because it's totally dependent on what ends up happening throughout the season. We might get, information that changes things and all of a sudden all of the really late drafts end up being the better drafts, but we also might get stuff that moves ADP so much that you want the opportunity to have really strong ADP, closing line value, which you can only get at this time of year. So it's all going to change one year to the next. So I like your idea of kind of mixing it up.
And it just kind of keeps keeps you thinking about it. And you just don't, if you change your mind, you have time to change your mind, right? You don't just do it all and be like, oh, wait, I saw, Alex Tout, Nyheim Hines, I don't have any. And it's too late because I already got 80% of my things in. So it's just nice it's like a diversification thing, right?
Yeah.
There's really no reason to. It's kind of like, why would you play DFS all in like 1 week of the year instead of just doing a little bit every week, right? That's kind of the way I look at it.
There's also an element of like, you can look at your exposure and realize, why do I have this much Corey Davis? I'm not going to take him for a few weeks again. And
yeah.
all of a sudden your exposure is more at a level that you're comfortable with. And then maybe at that point you start drafting him again, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think this has been a really instructive and fun conversation. Hopefully everyone enjoys it. It sounds like we will be doing this type of show about once a month throughout the off season. So very excited to have you with us along the ride. And then, of course, we will be back this season with our DFS shows. Can't wait for that. It's still a long ways away, but I'm sure it'll sneak up on us. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.